Note that when the left says you're opening people up to violence by disagreeing with us, not only are they trying to silence people that disagree, that's, of course, it's meant to emotionally batter you into submission. It also, though, opens the grounds for the state to use force, actual force, against you, because if your speech is actually violence, it is therefore justified for the state to threaten or use violence against you to stop your speech, as in arresting people for hate crime speech that the trans community finds so offensive, et cetera, et cetera. The argument is very clear. And this is what they believe. This is what the left believes. This is not aberrant.
We spend a lot of time talking about fighting for sanity in an insane world. Buck, I would have never believed that we would be in a position where we'd be saying, hey, only women can have babies. I would have never thought that that would be considered to be unacceptable or transphobic language at any point in my life. Today in the Senate, Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri, who's been on this show quite a lot, we're fans of his. He was questioning a Cal Berkeley law professor. Her name is, I want to make sure I get this right, although I might mispronounce it, Kira Bridges. I just want you to listen to this audio between the two of them, because I think it crystallizes how far left-wing Democrats have gone when it comes to the trans agenda. They want to say that people can get pregnant, not women, that men can get pregnant, and it's actually transphobic of you and me and anybody else out there who suggests that only women can get pregnant. Listen to this exchange today in the Senate.
You've referred to people with a capacity for pregnancy. Would that be women?
Many women, cis women, have the capacity for pregnancy. Many cis women do not have the capacity for pregnancy. There are also trans men who are capable of pregnancy, as well as non-binary people who are capable of pregnancy.
So this isn't really a women's rights issue.
We can recognize that this impacts women while also recognizing that it impacts other groups. Those things are not mutually exclusive, Senator Hawley.
Oh, so your view is that the core of this right then is about what?
So I want to recognize that your line of questioning is transphobic, and it opens up trans people to violence by not recognizing them.
Wow, you're saying that I'm opening up people to violence by asking whether or not women are the folks who can have pregnancies?
So I want to note that 1 out of 5 transgender persons have attempted suicide. So I think it's important
because of my line of questioning? So we can't talk about it?
Because denying that trans people exist and pretending not to know that they exist.
I'm denying that trans people exist by asking you if you're talking about women having pregnancies?
Do you believe that men can get pregnant?
No, I don't think women can get
So
pregnant.
you are denying that trans people exist?
And that leads to violence? Is this how you run your classroom? Are students allowed to question you?
Absolutely.
Or are they also treated like this, where
No,
they're told that they're opening up people to violence?
We have a good time in my class. You should join.
Oh, I bet.
You might learn a lot.
Wow, I would learn a lot. I've learned a lot just in this exchange.
Absolutely.
Extraordinary.
There's so much here, Clay. And
we got more that we're going to play for you, too, I think, as well. But, Buck, I mean, this is crazy.
This is, though, the argument of the left today. This is their orthodoxy. This is doctrine. Well, this professor from California, University of California, Berkeley, law school professor.
An elite law school.
In a tough law school to get into. Although, as we know now, the entire elite school apparatus has collapsed into nonsense effectively. There are morons at all of these places now, let me tell you, okay? There are idiots everywhere. I was looking at Ivy League business schools, and I went to work for Glenn instead. Jackasses aplenty there, law schools. I have tons of friends that went to Harvard Law, Yale Law, all these places. There are really smart people who go there, but it does not mean that everybody who goes there is of even a mildly impressive intellectual level at these different schools. So just start with that for anyone who's wondering. Clay and I were just talking about where do you want your kids to even go to school these days?
I think about it a lot now.
I mean, I don't know what to say, because the professors at so many of these institutions, and look, they've changed hiring standards. They have pushed very hard on affirmative action in higher education. I think it'll be interesting to look back and see that when the Supreme Court, I do believe, will overturn affirmative action
this fall,
then what you'll have to do, what they'll have to see is that these universities have put all these people on tenure track or given them tenure who would never have been hired otherwise because they do change standards. We all know they change standards. That's the reality of the college admissions and hiring process. What does it look like going forward in higher education? But that's a conversation we'll be having when that Supreme Court decision comes down. On what she says, though, this was fascinating. 1 out of 5 trans people have attempted suicide, she says. She cites that statistic to shut down a conversation about who can get pregnant. And normally you would look at that, you'd say, so are you telling me that there's a high correlation between being trans and having severe mental illness? Or are you blaming anyone who does not go along with all aspects of the trans agenda with somehow creating the extreme mental illness that leads to a disproportionately high suicide attempt rate? That would be one part of this that I would want to have a greater discussion with. But also note that when the left says you're opening people up to violence by disagreeing with us, not only are they trying to silence people that disagree, that's, of course, it's meant to emotionally batter you into submission. It also, though, opens the grounds for the state to use force, actual force, against you, because if your speech is actually violence, it is therefore justified for the state to threaten or use violence against you to stop your speech, as in arresting people for hate crime speech that the trans community finds so offensive, et cetera, et cetera. The argument is very clear. And this is what they believe. This is what the left believes. This is not aberrant.
Yeah, the Cal Berkeley professor specifically says men can get pregnant and says that it is transphobic to argue that men cannot get pregnant. You are being forced as a part of this Democrat dogma now to say things that are 100% scientific, biological lies. And to me, Buck, what is so fascinating about this is how much did you and I get lectured for being anti-science, for questioning the efficacy of the COVID shot or the intelligence of lockdowns? You and I got absolutely lacerated by the blue checks for having the gall to suggest that lockdowns and mandatory vaccines and all of this did not make sense. We wanted grandmas dead. We were anti-science. And yet the Democrat dogma now is men can get pregnant.
I could set this up as a very straightforward challenge for the people that make this argument. And understand, you must mouth the preferred slogans or else they will attack you. Macy Gray just went through this, the Grammy Award-winning, millionaire, famous singer. She said, a woman is a woman, and thinking you're a woman doesn't make you a woman. Very straightforward. She's 100% correct. And now she's had to do the whole walk back because the left completely, jumped on her, attacked her from every direction and every angle. They want you to affirm what is clearly untrue because it debases your ability to reason through everything else. When you have to say, this is a classic tactic. If you listen to that professor, she does sound like she's in a cult. I mean, the way, with the fluidity that she is making these statements that are so obviously untrue and stupid, it would be like sitting there with somebody who says, no, you don't understand. We've done all the research and the world is going to end next week. We have looked at the sacred charts, and the sacred charts tell us that that's when the magic aliens are going to land here and the world ends in a ball of fire. There's a certainty in the stupidity that almost shows you the synapses of the brain have been lined up in a very specific way through repetition of what is untrue.
Also, I would love for Senator Hawley, in addition to being called transphobic for saying that only women can get pregnant, I would love for him to follow up with this UC Berkeley professor and actually expose the flaws of logic in her line of thinking based on this, Buck. If you can pick your gender to her, I would love to hear her try to answer this. Why can't you also pick your race? Because she's a black woman. And she would be furious under Democrat dogma if someone who was not black decided they wanted to identify as black, or if someone who was not Hispanic wanted to identify as Hispanic or Asian, or whatever it is. Your racial identity, as we have talked about, is set in stone per Democrat dogma. but your gender can be whatever you want it to be.
Well, think about it as well. They use the term non-binary, meaning neither specifically male or
That's
specifically female. There's a binary choice of gender that we've lived with for all of human history and science, et cetera, et cetera. Now they say non-binary, but we know that everyone is effectively multiracial, that every one of us is, in fact, at different levels and degrees, multiracial or multi-ethnic in our background, which is a beautiful thing, but it's much more open to a perfect example of this. Kamala Harris is referred to as both the first African-American female vice president and the first South Asian female vice president, in terms of her background, right? Because one parent is, I believe, from India, another parent's from Jamaica. Now, that's
right.
True. Great, fine. But there's clearly more variability in racial and ethnic background that all of us have. Anyone who's done 23andMe knows this. Than gender variability. There actually is.
No doubt.
And remember, they're not making, because they will often try to confuse us on purpose, intersex as a physical reality is not the case that they are making, because even people who are intersex, they used to refer to this as being a hermaphrodite condition. They're generally more one than the other, but they can have vestigial organs.
It's incredibly rare biologically.
It's like a one in a It's like a 1 in a million circumstance. Yes.
Some people are born with sex organs that would suggest, I think it's like Klein syndrome, something like that, unless I'm misremembering it from biology. But that is a reality. It's wildly uncommon, and almost instantly they make a decision, we're going to raise this child as either male or female based on which one they are more likely to be reflective
But
of.
this is not, the trans agenda and the trans doctrine is not, we need to specifically understand those, because most of those individuals end up living as male or female and they go forward.
That's right.
That is not what they're saying, though. What they're saying is the physical reality is irrelevant. You can have entirely developed, male testes and sex organs, everything else, and now you are to be treated not as somebody who is emotionally and psychologically associated with the female gender, but as a woman, period. This is, there's a degree of religiosity in this that people need to understand. This is, it's a little bit like you have to accept that there is a miracle of science that has transpired here, and that's how you get to men can get pregnant, because they can't, and we will never lose this bet, Clay.
Not only that, it has real consequences oftentimes. Let's say that you are having to be rushed to an emergency room, and they're trying to figure out what's wrong with you. Pretending that you're a different gender than you are changes the way that you will be treated, right? Because the doctor is responding, what could be wrong? Well, if you have an ovary, something might be different than if you don't. Men and women have different biologies, which often leads to different things that could be wrong with them when they're rushed into the hospital. But this is emblematic. I think playing that clip is important because that is Democrat dogma.
And she also despises, it's very clear, Josh Hawley
yes.
for the most basic recitation of fact. And
That's
this is everyone needs to get used to this. Obviously, Macy Gray learned this the hard way, which is you can now be hated by people who want to ruin you and make an example of you for saying something that is as objectively true as 2 + 2 = 4. People will say, how dare you? It equals 5. You should get fired from your job. And it's not just us. It's not just adults. They're doing this to kids. They're doing this to very young children. They're pushing this all over the place. This is a societal madness. And this is why we say, man, we're living on team reality here.
They're arguing, Buck, that sometimes doctors get the sex of a baby wrong. That's
Isn't
what
that
their
kind of
position
offensive
is.
to doctors? Think about that, right? It's like,
Yeah,
the doctor made quite a mistake there.
Yeah, right. I mean, I've been there for 3 babies. I felt pretty confident when they came out what sex they were.
Yeah.